Good evening. Thank you so much for coming and welcome to the Whitechapel Gallery. My name is Sofia Victorino. I'm Head of Education and Public Programs, and it is my great pleasure to be introducing today's event that marks and celebrates the new commission of Kader Attia for the Whitechapel Gallery, a project curated by my colleague Chief Curator Magnus of Petersens. And I'll just make a brief introduction to this evening and to the conversation that will unfold as our evening develops. So Kader Attia's new work is titled Continuum of Repair, The Light of Jacob's Ladder. And it revisits the biblical tale of Jacob's ladder, he will talk about it later on, where the prophet has this vision or dream of angels ascending from earth to heaven. This is the latest stage in Kader's ongoing research into the concept of repair, and repair as an infinity of possibilities and as an underlying principle of development and evolution in both culture, science, nature. The display also echoes a dialogue with the space of the former John Passmore Edwards Library and Reading Room here at the gallery, and it traces the evolution of knowledge through art, Western and non-Western, through architecture, science, anthropology, politics, physics, astronomy, mirrored in a constellation of books and artifacts evocative of those histories and of the ghosts of modernity, as Kader just said a while ago. Today we are really pleased to have Magnus of Petersens and Kader Attia in conversation. Kader will begin with a presentation of the work and research that led to the current project and share some of the questions that have informed his practice over the past years. This will be followed by a conversation with Magnus, and then we'll open up to all of you for Q&A. On a brief biographical note, Kader Attia was born in Paris into an Algerian family, and he studied at École Supérieure in Paris and in Barcelona, Escuela de Artes Aplicadas. Kader is now based in Berlin, but he grew up between France and Algeria and later lived in Alger, Kinshasa, Brazzaville. He also spent time in Venezuela. All these experiences have deeply informed his work, and I would say his nomadic way of thinking, as he puts it, and also the way he addresses notions of belonging, identity, migration, knowledge, and history. Since his first solo show in 1996 in Kinshasa, Congo, Kader has widely exhibited internationally, working across a variety of media: sculpture, installation, photography, film. You might have seen the extraordinary installation at Documenta and at the latest Documenta, which was titled The Repair from Occident to Extra-Occidental Cultures. And this installation looked into cultural reappropriation or reconstruction and juxtaposed African masks that had been repaired and where demand was visible with images of wounded soldiers in World War I, alongside wooden sculptures made by traditional sculptures from Dakar and Senegal, and marble sculptures from Carrara, and a whole series of other archival materials which was on display. More recently this year, Kader had a solo exhibition at the Kunstwerk in Berlin, which continued the research into cultural exchange, investigating ways in which Europe addresses its colonial past. And this was also titled Repair, 5 Acts. Other recent solo shows and projects include a presentation at the Musée d'Art Moderne de la Ville de Paris, which was titled Construire, Déconstruire, Reconstruire, le corps utopique, in which Kader made an intervention in the permanent collections display, which presented a previous work called La Piste d'Atterrissage from 2003. And this was also thinking about the body as a kind of primordial or primal architecture. You might be familiar with the work he has presented at Tate Liverpool in the Liverpool Biennial in 2012. It was titled, untitled Gardaia, based on a model of the Algerian town with the same name, made from couscous, shown alongside photographs of Le Corbusier and Fernand Pouillon. So Kader Attia has been exhibited widely. He will take us on this journey through his work in many other major international institutions, including solo exhibition at the ICA Boston and also at the Henry Art Gallery in Seattle, but also the Pompidou, the Palais de Tokyo, and many other spaces, but also biennales such as the Sydney Biennale in 2010, Havana 2009, Lyon, 5th Venice Biennale. So I would just like once more to welcome all of you and to say an enormous thanks both to my colleague Magnus and to Kader Attia for his immense generosity for the whole duration of the project and for being available to talk to us tonight. Thank you very much, and please join me in welcoming both of them.
Thank you very much. I feel like at home with this chair. It's so low and so comfortable. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much, Magnus, Sophia, for this introduction, Ivona, everyone who is part of this amazing place, which is Whitechapel. I've been so delighted to see that with a free entrance you can have so many people of any social class coming in a museum, and even different cultural background, having a tour in the Sarah Lucas show, which is very much oriented, let's say. I really appreciate it. I think that what I want to talk to you tonight is at some point in this importance I really care about, talking about the repair as an incredible and complex concept, the genealogy of this concept. I think it's very important today that before to get into such project that is now presented in here, I would like set up the genealogy of this concept and how it has been developed in my mind, because obviously it didn't fall from the sky. I've been working during many years before the repair on a concept called reappropriation. Many of you have heard about the reappropriation within art history. I think there was even a movement during the 80s in US called reappropriation, something like this. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm very much into talking about the genealogy of reappropriation into one of the most emblematic thinker of the anarchism, the French Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, who, with his critique of property, developed the theory that property is theft. And with this property theft means that we have to reappropriate the theft. What is extremely interesting with this, the theory of reappropriation by Pierre-Joseph Proudhon is that, as Jacques Rancière mentioned in one of his latest books, Le Spectateur émancipé, he actually did an interesting interpretation of an article in a French newspaper, in a French anarchist newspaper at the end of the 19th century, in which a carpenter who is cleaning the floor get tired at some point and then stand up in this private villa of a Parisian bourgeois, and he starts to watch through the windows the landscape. He starts actually to appreciate the perspective that he has from this villa to the landscape. Is like appropriating this perspective. What Rancière, in his famous text, I really invite you to read this part of the book, Le Spectateur émancipé, is explaining that the difference between the harms of this worker and the eye of the same person is the converging line to this center point, which is the focus of the perspective. I found this example extremely interesting. I found this example extremely interesting because in the end, the name of the newspaper is Le Tocsin des Travailleurs. In the end, the stake which represents the liberty to appreciate a perspective, the liberty of having a look, is a process is very much similar with many different reappropriation that I've been observing the last 10 years in different traditional cultures, not modern ones. One of the most interesting examples is this picture that I used to do many years in Algeria near the place where my parents live with teenagers. I was even part of this game when I was a kid in an old Roman ruins called Gemila, which used to be a city of Roman soldiers, retired actually, of 11,000 soldiers. This, you can see that the Roman Empire for cities of retired soldiers have theater of 3,000 seats, just to give you the idea of this great civilization. What is interesting in this example is that I remember very well, because I played soccer here, is that the youth of the villages nearby use this arch, which is left from a Roman temples, as the goal of a soccer game all the time. And actually, this is what Proudhon defined as the reappropriation. The fact that the liberty of developing another appreciation belongs not only to your, I would say, ability of reading history or culture, but just with this instinct of decided whatever you want. Like in this example, arch become meme. So from this reappropriation, which is at some point a transformation, to another one that I called Mimicism, there's not that much space, actually, I have to say. The reuse of these styles on the terrace of my home place in Algeria, made by my own father, who also is retired now and doesn't have a lot of money. So he went to the factory of tiles nearby, also the Alma, the village, and he gathered what was left, what he could buy with his coins. And then my father was, when he was working, a builder. So he has always the dream of having his terrace, drinking his glass of wine and smoking a cigarette. So this interpretation of his terrace is also, for me, definitely a form of reappropriation. There is an order, but it's not the order that would be expected as a mosaic, for instance. The occupation of this Fernand Pouillon, one of the most important French modernists who built in Algeria, maybe the most interesting social housing project, which is called the 200 columns city, is totally reappropriated, occupied by satellite dishes. These satellite dishes are very interesting. They are very interesting because, as someone told me once, watching this landscape, because you just have to imagine that it's like bigger than this, than what you see. He said that it's fascinating that behind each satellite dishes there is one family or one person. So, observing this as an artist, I was very sensitive to the fact that each presence of satellite dishes at some point was a signature of something. And there are two words here, since I'm speaking, which are very important in my researches, is the perspective and the signature. The perspective, because is at some point the continuum. The signature, because is the expression of the self. The expression of the self you have here in front of you by let's say, recuperation, recyclement, I mean, of found materials, leftover material from building sites that are about to be reused in shantytown. This is what I call the expression of the self and the reappropriation. So, what leads us to the concept of reappropriation is not one way. It's complex. It's a sort of tree of life with junction that at some point leads to something which makes sense and some other totally unexpected. This mimetism, reproduction of boats by young people, or maybe what definitely could embody a step to the repair, the inclusion of Western items or Western symbols, or I mean within a colonial society by the colonized people. Let me show you an example. The Brazilian poet developed through an interesting poem, which is also working as a manifesto, the Manual of Cultural Anthropophagy, that within a colonized society, one of the most instinctive reaction by the dominated people is to cannibalize the power, especially the representation of the dominating power. There's a beautiful sentence, and I'm so delighted to say this in London by Osvaldo de Andrade, is Tupi or not Tupi? Because the Brazilian Indian are Tupi. And this Tupi or not Tupi, it's beautiful because we are in the 30s, at the beginning of another modernity, the tropical modernity. This reappropriation, as he says, is a form of cannibalism. But what I found extremely interesting in my whole research on, as I told you, I developed in the beginning, at some point has reappropriation, is that in the places I've been living, I mean Algeria or Congo, two places that I know quite well, I discovered that at some point the poverty, the economic context developed in the average of population a way not only of reusing, recycling material to survive, but also to at some point to build a message. In this wooden colonial helmet, or in this flip-flap made with bottles, in the use, like in these old pictures, of coins, in some hairdress, in the use of this milk box as a decoration, in the use of whiskey bottles as nkisi, a Congo fetish, the center part of this bottle aim at receiving, and originally here is empty, but at receiving the magical mixture, like in many fetishes from Congo. Let's go back to this interesting example, the coins. Why the coins? The coins because, or the buttons. The coins because when I was a child, I also remember my mother telling us the story that my grandmother, during the Algerian War, used to, going back from one hill to another, gather, let's say, traditional silver jewels, when her buckets were totally full. I know exactly the cave because I saw it when I was young. There is a cave in which resistance were like gathering all this silver. And after weeks, the whole traditional jewels, which used to belong to young bride, was brought to Tunisia, which was through the mountains and the mines, to Tunisia to be melted and sold to buy Kalashnikov for the resistance. I found this story that I kept in my mind for a long time as a sort of interesting, I'd say, also angle of understanding how much mimetism is resistance. In these coins that you find from the whole North Africa until Middle East, and the whole sub-Saharan Africa from Mali, Niger, Sudan, etc., I discovered that the fact that jewels and hairdress decoration were and are still at some point in traditional society used as anthropophagic symbols of power, it is very easy. In every coins, in every French coins, like here, you have the representation of the French Republic symbol, La Marianne, or down there, the representation of the Emperor, Napoleon III. You can see it much closer on these jewels. In this also amazing necklace that is here turning back, to us, because on the other side you have all these stones decoration. You can see on some places, like down there, I'm going to show you maybe something closer, yeah. You can see that the presence of the coins of these colonial symbols, colonial hegemony, were included, were transformed, were reappropriated in jewels. And with all the strength that this represents. So the link between my personal story and this, what I call Mimicism as resistance, start to develop and create the basis of what we will talk about later as a repair. The portrait here of the Belgian king, Leopold. I'm sure, and I've seen some jewels made with the portrait of the Queen Victoria or George V, I think, Napoleon III. So all these traditional Berbers jewels, for me, were, I think, definitely the most interesting political example of what will happen later, because most of these jewels are from the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th. What will happen after? I don't know if I can tell you. I want I mean, one of the most interesting part of the repair is obviously also as far as I'm concerned, to involve the audience in the sensitive aspect of the repair. Reappropriation it is definitely much more easier to understand it when you listen some music. Maybe the most interesting example is I would say, the different kind of music developed within the colonial time at the very early age of independence by African music. One of the most interesting style is definitely the Malian blues. I'm all the time, I don't have any soundtrack here to make you, maybe on my phone, I'm not sure, I don't think so. But the thing of, sorry, just 1 second. Unfortunately not. The thing is that I definitely invite you to listen Ali Farka Touré sound that you can have here. I go back for the name, the first name, who is the father of Malian blues music. And I think that everything that you have heard about blues and which create in your mind references of North America and the border of Mississippi, cotton field, and all this context happens when you are listening to the blues of Ali Farka Touré, who is in this picture. Do you think it's possible to have my laptop here, which is in my bag? I would like at least to try to put one music after a while, but I'm continuing the lecture. I think what is interesting in the context of Mali blues is that I never figured out until I went to Bamako and then to the north of Mali along the Niger River, that what was the ground for North American blues, the cotton field, the border of Mississippi, the slavery as well, etc., was yet existing in Mali. The border of the Niger, the cotton field, I mean the cotton culture, and the strong, tough Malian history, especially with Islamic invasion from north. You might have known about the Dogon people who have escaped the Islamism jihad, I mean colonization, and established themselves at the shadow of the Bandiagara, how do you say it in English, falaise? Cliffs, yeah, which is 400 kilometers long. So I've always been fascinated by the fact that the question of music, even if here with these images looks like at some point very much figurative, illustrative. Can I have the laptop, please? So it's a bit improvisation, but you do not regret. It's fantastic. I think that...
Stuart was saying you can point.
Ah, fantastic. Fantastic, yeah. I think what is interesting, of course, Fela Kuti, you know, here in London, the influence of Fela was very, very strong. Though Fela, for me, is much more even the next step, because he's at some point reappropriating but reinventing something else. Rather than Ali Farka Touré or Pepe Kale, Oumou Sangaré, Abfel Bokoum in Congo, Joseph Kabasele, they are reusing music which has been invented in a slavery context, far from Africa, and bringing back them to Africa to inaugurate, to celebrate the beginning of the independence, which I found extremely interesting. So, why music is important? Music is important talking about an artwork such as the one which is presented here, because music is just about a wave, exactly like light. Light is nothing but wave. We can see each other because of the impact of this wave in our eyes. You can listen to me because of the movement of this wave. So, talking about Ali Farka Touré blues, for instance, you have different sound, but I mean, this is much more traditional. I don't know if you listen. You have it? Okay. Now, something which is much more, let's say, end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s. So as you can see, especially in these kind of tracks, the influence of let's say, modern instrument get very strong, I mean, in sort of, for us, a confusion of from where the music is come. In this, if I remember, Malidje as well, is based on a very traditional music, but when you listen to this, you can't, I mean, be elsewhere than in Louisiana or... Okay, and now something much more classic in this Malian blues, which also sounds very much rock, but American and North American blues is A Ghana by Ali Farka. Basically, the most interesting part of all this music is that they've been developed and took over an incredible importance in Africa within the struggling time of against colonial orders and at the very early times of independence until the 70s. This Malian music that you listen was until the beginning of the 80s the national music of Mali. Another track which is maybe also very interesting is the one that in another kind of music, the cha-cha, Caribbean sounds. There are also merengue and Congolese rumba, which by Joseph Kabasele became at some point the African national music for independence. It was written by Joseph Kabasele in a bar of Brussels when Lumumba and Kasavubu were setting up the new Congo. It's called Indépendance Cha-Cha. I could play hours and hours. The thing is that what is extremely interesting here with these influences is, as far as I'm concerned, how much Western musicologists thought that at the very early times of independence, African musicians were just copying. And it was normal to say this, though all this music were invented by their ancestors in slavery areas. The idea of reappropriation and the repair comes here with such funny music as Independence Cha-Cha or what we could call, oh no, this is not African music, this is American music. The idea that I think it's extremely interesting to understand from where you can find a continuity in front of any creation. In Algeria, when my cousin Rabeh did this incredible gesture without any setting, without any stage. I was just holding my camera in a movie called Correspondance, taking from one side of the farm to another 2 leftover pieces to make a sort of small, very incredible toy to his brother. The thing is that I think one of the most interesting issues of thinking at some point theoretically the reappropriation of the repair or the repair is that you build it by observation. There is observation because even when Rabeh is doing this instrument, he's making it subconsciously, without any staging, I told you, but at some point, I'm totally convinced that this is a continuity of something. This continuity is what you're going to understand now in how reappropriation leads us to the repair. When I was in Congo, living in Congo, beginning of the 90s, I remember that after many months of getting fascinated by all the artifacts, one of my best friends, Armand, gave me this present, which is a kuba in Chacocot fabric made with raffia. I was struck by this inclusion of French fabric, kind of Vichy fabric, and also the fact that every piece of fabric were, fixed with a sort of very delicate embroidery. The thing is that behind these holes, maybe 4 years after, I discovered that actually behind these pieces of repair, I discovered that there is sometimes tiny and some other bigger hole made probably by insect. It took me 4 years to understand that actually this was not only an aesthetic gesture, but also an ethical one. It was a repair as well as decoration. And this is extremely important, extremely fundamental. As well as in this calabash, the ethical aspect of the repair, the fixation of the broken part of this calabash, the use of an old also milk box coming from the West, the inclusion of a Western leftover item in this traditional item. I would say the echo, I don't know if you have a nice image like I do here, but the echo of this wire used to repair these items is definitely in a sort of continuity of the dialogue that the pattern of this furniture has, this cross. You can see even here the fact that the person who repaired this could have done, at least could have put this string like this, but he actually decided to put it in cross, in echo to the pattern, the engraving of the wood. Some of the most also fascinating and unexpected repair, which really struck me into this conception and development of the repair, is the fact that here again, the person who repaired it did not only fix the item, but signed at some point his presence as a self, saying that I'm here, I repaired, and at some point, what I'm doing is much more important than the object, which is exactly the opposite of the Western modernity process of repair, which actually aim at boring, removing, making disappearing anything that has to do with this failure. And conceptually and culturally is extremely important. It's extremely important because it's totally, it has much more to do than just a single piece broken to repair. It is philosophically fundamental. One of the most interesting things I discovered when I was working in this repair is that most of the items I have seen at the British Museum or at Tervuren or at Smithsonian African Museum of Art or in Quai Branly in Paris, in most of the ethnographic and ethnology museum I've visited, most of also of the German Ethnologische Museum I have seen, is that when I was asking for repaired object that has been brought from Africa, there were no answers. There were no answers because in all the Western database of museum, there's no a single category of repaired item. There's no single category of repaired item which include Western element. So just can you imagine that all these almost millions items brought from Africa slept into storages? The whole 20th century has hybrid item. I remember I have seen a Songi from Congo fetish in Smithsonian African Art Museum, in which, if I remember, one of the shell, the sculpture has two eyes made with two shells. One has been lost maybe 70 or 80 years ago. It has been replaced at that time within the village in its original context with a colonial traditional button. So the object gets hidden and at some point seen as a sort of non-interesting items, following this sort of purity that the Western modern mind was looking for by ethnologists. Why this moment leads us to the First World War? It leads us because these millions of items which has been stored and forgotten the whole 20th century came at the end of the 19th century and at the beginning of the 20th century. And the rise of ethnography, and anthropology is at this time. The First World War didn't embody only a war with fight. It embodied the complex struggle for modernity between all the countries, between the German Dr. Joseph in Berlin, the French Hippolyte Morestin, British doctors who were working on the repair of injured soldiers. The real stake was so much how to be able to repair these broken faces and get them as they were at the beginning. Though, as I told you, in traditional culture, the agenda is totally the reverse. So I have been fascinated by this complex moment of the First World War, the way that native soldiers from all the European countries were involved in war. Not only the way they died, because they were sent immediately to the front, but maybe by some details, like in these pictures, the way that these survivors, because we are in an hospital of soldiers, is like proudly, even sitting at the side of a priest, having his instrument. The music is never so far, you will see later. I've been fascinated by the analogies possible between the rough aspect of some traditional repair and the rough repair that were practiced within the battlefield, most of the time by women, young nurses, helping doctors who were totally overwhelmed by the quantity of injured soldiers. Like Suzanne Noël in France, who used to work with Hippolyte Morestin and sewing the faces of the soldiers so roughly that in the beginning of the battlefield and inside some time of the battlefield at the beginning of the war. My researches on these injured soldiers on a war that ran 4 years, as you know, were extremely interesting because again, the beginning of the first images of the beginning of the war were definitely representing this analogy with traditional repair. And in the end, the disappearance of it. So, what is important here to know, talking about the fetish, the Songhi fetish I was telling you, you have another absolutely enigmatic fetish here, repaired, in which you don't know really what was before, the shells or the other item. Nobody can know. I think this is also another interesting part of the signature of the subject who repair. He creates enigmas. Like in this mask, if someone here can tell me what was before, I would say bravo. It's extremely difficult. So you are someone who is thinking behind this. It is not absolutely not free. So going back to this complexity of the repair and the fact that the analogies between the roughness of the broken items and the overwhelmed situation of the doctors in a war that was a modern war with modern weapons, but with classic techniques of fighting, I've been very much focusing in these analogies. So sometimes it's images speak by themselves. So this beautiful Dan mask. At the beginning, the injuries were rough, repaired as rough items. The more we get into time, the more this Western agenda of the myth of the perfect, getting back to the original aspect, which is totally a myth, which is absolutely impossible, is visible, especially in this picture. And this one. So, what leads to the reflection which leads to this, the complexity of the concept of the reaper is to understand whether the reaper as an ethical and aesthetical process is a cultural process or a natural one. In all traditional societies, the fantasy of reinventing the body, reinventing it because at some point, because of, I would say, a frustration of what nature produced, has been present. What really fascinates me in these researches many years ago is that the most interesting discoveries were not made in non-Western cultures, but in again, storages of museums, especially the French Museum of Quai Branly, on a collection that used to belong to the Musée de l'Homme. While these same of scarified people, or Mangbetu women, or old lips plate women were seen as wild person in fair, like in, I think there was a Chelsea colonial fair in England, just tell me after if I'm wrong, but there's this famous Brussels and Paris colonial exhibition and New York. While these people were presented as almost as not monster, but as curiosity, especially like the Mangbetu, for instance, which practiced this kind of banal, actually, I have to say, transformation of the skull, which you can find in any population from Alaska to the Inca to Japan. What's really interests me with these Mangbetu people is that actually, at Quai Branly, in a collection made by French anthropologists at the end of the 19th century, there were already observations of skull transformation within the French society in the 19th century, in villages near Toulouse and Les Deux-Sèvres and Bordeaux, called les déformations intentionnelles. Les déformations toulousaines, because most of them have been observed near the city of Toulouse. I'm talking about the second part of the 19th century. 50 years after, Mangbetu women, Congolese, were seen as animals in colonial exhibition in between the two wars in Paris. This is exactly what I think that the interest of art, looking at history and trying to reenact the missing part of history is extremely important because it's the continuity. This practice of skull deformation in a more than modern society, if we think that the modernity started in Renaissance, or even after with the rationalism of René Descartes, we are at the end of the 19th century and with a kind of skull transformation which could be much more compared to traditional society, non-Western traditional society. This is what I think is fundamentally important. In my work, all the time, I'm trying to find not only the continuity, but to avoid to get lost in this exotism of what you are observing. There's not in this lecture presentation of artifact made by the soldier in the trench of the First World War, but it is exactly the same process of these jewels made by women, Berber women in North Africa. The use of coins, of symbol of power, and the reinvention of an art in front of the door of hell by reusing instruments of death as shells and bullets. I think this is extremely important. Finishing with this analogy, what leads us in this discussion, finishing with these analogies with how this society would have seen these transformed faces. I'm very keen to understand if there is a possible link between these fetishes and this face. Why the link? The link because of this sentence. The link because of this sentence, which is not my sentence, I have to say. It's a sentence of a French ethnologist whose name is Serge Gruzinski, after a long dialogue we had. And Serge told me, you know, Kader, I have to say something. Some years ago, I have to curate a show at Quai Branly Museum, and I needed 3 Greek sculptures from the Museum of Louvre. So as a person, as a curator, and part of the CNRS, he could have access to this. He has the Musée du Louvre. I would like to borrow 3 Greek sculptures for this exhibition at Quai Branly. And you know what they answered? They said, there's no Greek sculpture at Musée du Louvre. What are you talking about? There's no Greek sculpture. You have one arm Greek, or one head. But what we know today by antique Greek art has been remade by Roman, broken in the Middle Age, repaired at the Renaissance, changed at the Classic Age. At the 19th century, we removed the arms because they were weak. Everything is repaired. And this between these incredible things that everything is repaired, as this concrete example, or much more, I would say, metaphysic issue of the repair, is that exactly as in this incredible ellipse by Stanley Kubrick in his famous space Odyssey. I'm sure you know all this moment in which this prehistoric man is like discovering the strength that gives him the use of these big bones. Is discovering the tool. And after hitting his relative, who, if I remember, fell down, he threw up to the sky this bone, and floating to the sky, like in the middle of the image, with maybe the strongest ellipse in movie history ever by Stanley Kubrick, this fading of the bones, which has the same shape of the spatial chip. Stanley Kubrick is telling us here exactly what I'm trying to tell you, that nothing's changed. We are just struggling for the same things. And what leads us to this, I would say, space odyssey is definitely 2 things. So I'm going to finish with this, Magnus, and then I'll give you the word. But I think this is extremely important. Working on my researches, which brought me onto, at some point in this ellipse of Stanley Kubrick, I discovered something fascinating, something that you all know here because we are in England. The story of Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace. The fact that when Darwin retired to develop a theory of the evolution of species, it took I think I remember, 9 years to work on it. One day, he received a book. Let's call this story the book. He received a book which is actually an essay by a young naturalist whose name is Alfred Russel Wallace, who admired Darwin, I think from Archipelago. He sent this book to the master of Darwin, who is yet established and recognized by the Royal Society, telling him, I would like to know what you think about this book. Darwin read the book and get into a deep, extreme depression, because the book is the theory of evolution that Darwin was working on. So I read a lot about this, and I discovered that some relative of Darwin was telling him, you have to publish your theory. Many people are thinking about this. But he could not have imagined that someone would have followed the same way, and especially someone who lived in London, almost at the same street, sending him the book from the opposite side of the earth. Here, we have in front of something that is extremely both mysterious and interesting. Darwin is fair play. He's going to introduce Alfred Russel Wallace to the Royal Scientific Society. Wallace will have his career. They will work even together on the theory of the evolution to get it more perfect. Until, I think, 15 years after or 20 years after, they start to get into, I would say, a sort of disagreement. These disagreements lead us to 2 things. One, birds. And the second, the work which is presented here at Whitechapel. Remember when I was telling you before that the perspective at some point is a social property? Have you heard about the bird of paradise, especially what we called in French le jardinier à nuque rose? This I translated as I could, the pink-necked gardener. is a small, tiny bird which established is, I mean, after cleaning a huge area in the Papua New Guinea forest, start to build during 10 months an old architecture that could rise at 1.50 m high. In front of this incredible house, he built a corridor. But it's not all. There's more. He's decorating it with flower, feathers, shells, elements, fruit. It's like decorating it so that when the female comes, she stays in front of the corridor and she admires the walk and see if the guy is okay. So she stays in front of the corridor. Many people have observed, I mean, many scientists, ornithologists have observed this, but they never figure out why. In 1997, 3 ornithologists from Cornell University put a camera exactly when the females stand. And they discovered that this bird is actually putting the biggest items and the smallest items not at the same position. The closer to the female are the big items. The more you get deep, they are smaller and smaller and smaller. These birds are creating perspective, and they are the female choose the one who is much more able to create the illusion of space, of perspective. And this is the invention of perspective, maybe 50,000 years or 100,000 years before Brunelleschi in the Renaissance. That I found extremely interesting. The way that these birds are also reacting to the modern time leads us to Wallace. Because today they are not using flowers and feather, leaves, or they are using found material. They are creating even what we called art brut in their architecture. They are creating installation. They are, I mean, this is the corridor. They are creating installation. What I found extremely interesting here, talking to you about Darwin and Wallace, is that the controversy, the disagreement between them, Darwin said no, the evolution of any species, especially the human one, is led by a sort of determinism, what he used to call a blind hazard. And Wallace said, no, Mr. Darwin. If the environment would have been, I would say, the package for this evolution, it doesn't make sense. Because human being, as its Neanderthalian step, could have lived until now in the forest and the savanna. It didn't have to evaluate. The fact that the evolution led to today, this conversation happened during the Industrial Revolution, the beginning of the end of the destruction of the environments. It's a nonsense. What Wallace says, as far as I'm concerned, is extremely important. He's just asking whether the human being is able to adapt, not to the environment, but to the human being. And that's another, I would say, another question to develop. So thank you very much, Magnus, and sorry if I've been a little bit late.
Can you hear me? Is my... Thank you. Great. Or shall I use the microphone, or... Is it working? Can you hear me? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Kader. It's a fascinating journey you've taken us on, and I think it's really good that we got this background for what we have here, because you selected works and ideas, I think, that are building up to this work, especially. Before we go into this, I got so curious about some of the connections you made and inspirations. I was thinking about, for example, collage as something that is also simultaneous almost with the second or the First World War, or thereabout. And I also heard that there are theories about the site of bombed villages, of destroyed people, as kind of an influence on collage. Do you have any, because we talked about collage also, you work with collage sometimes. Can you see that connection that collage, repair? And
oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I think the collage is definitely a form of repair.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, formally, the collage, I do a lot of collage, and formally you take something and you stick it on some other, I mean, near another thing, and you create something else, which actually, I think one of the most fascinating issue of collage, like editing in movie, is the fact that bringing two different things, you create a third thing which has nothing to do with these things. Definitely, yes, Magnus.
Yeah. So, and what fascinates me also, talking about this different works, is how, and which led up to Darwin and Wallace, is how it seems like there are similar processes in nature as in culture. This is what you have discovered, it seems. And that leads us into this project. Where shall we start? Something about, well, you walked from reappropriation as a kind of strategy to gain your self-expression, and then discovering similarities between these cultural processes of sort of development and hybrids into nature and science. So what we have here is an installation that continues from there. Do you want to say something about, for example, the books that surround us? What are they about?
I think the way that, what is important regarding also this, the way that I've decided to set up this conversation, the lecture and the work, is that for me, it because I really do care about the audience, as you know, Magnus, yeah. It was important to frame a sort of analogy, genealogy of the project. Definitely now, after this corpus of knowledge I developed here, you understand why the whole Jacob ladder, which is actually represented by the facing mirrors, is surrounded by this amount of incredible knowledge. The knowledge is important. Yeah. The knowledge is important because, I mean, we all know how much knowledge has been, I mean, in all life, through libraries, through education, staging us. You can't see the world without the prism of what the knowledge you have been influenced to or sensitive to or educated by has shaped your mind. But what is important here is what Michel Foucault called in his archaeology of the knowledge. The fact that if the human modern agenda was to gather as much as possible, the image is not here, but I mean, traditional artifact that I showed you tonight in Ethnologist Museum, for instance, art in art museums. I mean, the fact that this modern agenda, by creating the storage culture, you know, basically in traditional societies, in Papua New Guinea, in Africa, in Latin America, in the Middle East, most of the items, especially those built with ephemeral material, were not aimed to be conserved. Mm-hmm. In Papua New Guinea, most of the masks that you see today in Museum of Papua New Guinea are not supposed to be here. Just for you to know, the ritual is that they have to be destroyed after. Mm-hmm. So I think at some point I decided also to stage this impressive storage as a reference to the ghost of the space, what used to be the Whitechapel gallery, but also as a critique of the library. As a critique of the library, as a tool of controlling the othernesses, what was basically one of the most, the main colonial agenda of Europe onto the otherness.
Yeah, it's a bit of a paradox, the way you want to learn about the other. There's all those books about atlases and sort of astronomy as outer space. All this is far away from us.
Yeah, it's a paradox, but I would say, Magnus, I agree with you, but I would say it's also an oxymoron.
Yeah.
It's this idea of talking about light in darkness. Is the fact that I'm fascinated by not only the continuity, but by this, I would say, idea that within two things that have nothing to do together, you have at least one thing that they share, their differences, which is this is a sentence of René Descartes. So I'm fascinated by the fact that any person here has someone else as a symmetric.
Yeah. So walking around, we have chapters on art, philosophy, math, the world, sort of travel, literature, and wars, and then we enter this sort of even more condensed space with a vitrine, where it's very like a very select group of juxtapositions of works, and you can follow a certain loop there. I was starting in one corner, and it's a nice corner on the lower left there. you can start, because that also tells the story of Jacob and Jacob's ladder, and there are the prints of this, and it goes from quite descriptive of mathematics and so on. But these kind of breakage points appears, for example, in Discourse on Method by Descartes. It's printed by the Library of Religion of Science.
Yeah, this is interesting.
Yeah.
This is extremely interesting, because in the end, you know, talking about Darwin and Wallace, the biggest disagreement they have is that on one hand you have someone who is not athei but determinist, on the other hand not a creationist crazy person, but someone who thinks that there is something else. The fact that this evolution of human being leads to something, there is something else. What I found extremely interesting, I totally agree by your reference, Magnus, this moment in which I put the father of rationalism and his discourse on the method and the myth of Jacob, coming from maybe the Bible. It's exactly here as well a sort of paradox or oxymoron, and at some point the transition, the fundamental transition within this loop of the vitrine to something else. And this something else is the fact that I have to say something here tonight that you know, because we spoke about, but the audience doesn't know, is the fact that I've been struck some years ago by an experience made by a French quantum physicist whose name is Serge Haroche, and who is the former Nobel Prize of Physics. During 17 years, with his student in Paris, they developed a machine with two tiny mirrors, curved mirrors, which aim but by putting them closed, work as a sort of box, sphere. Inside this space, it's a bit complex to understand, but they could introduce one elementary particle of light, a photon. After 1/10 of a second, because of the mirror effect, this particle came back and forth between each side of the mirror. After 1/10 of a second, this particle did 10,000 kilometers. So the mirror gets warm. That's why they use a special, extremely rare steel, but steel that do not move from the perfect 0 degree during the whole experience. But here we are. After 1/10 of a second, this particle disappears. Disappear in the reflection. They don't know where it goes. This is what I call a repair. A repair by who? A repair by an order which is beyond and before us, and which decide that this anomaly is not possible. And I think this is extremely interesting regarding the Jacob ladder myth, because of how everything we know today, until something else, but today, about the universe is measuring through light, fastness, speed.
Yeah. And the mirror is interesting also, I think, as a kind of void that is created here. And I'm just thinking how you used mirrors sometimes in other works. And of course, there's so many associations you can make about reflection and learning, and there is also this term called the mise en abîme that André Gide introduced in literary theory, and taking from heraldics, where there is in a weapon shield, there is a shield inside it with the same. So it's about making an image inside the image. So it's like almost like Chinese boxes going in. And the mirror can also represent the void, as I said, and nothing happens in absence until you have something in front of it. But that which is, if that which is in front of it is another mirror, it's something, it becomes very strange. So how have you worked before with mirrors and the idea of absence sometimes? Could you say something about that?
Yeah, of course, Magnus. I've been working on the idea of absence, not only on mirrors, but even with, I would say, the relation that the emptiness, the void, and the fullness is working together in some work like Ghost, or in some installation, or just gesture of single plastic bags, empty, I mean, standing until the moment is going to collapse. I like very much this idea of the absence. I have to say that in mirrors, what really, I mean, I'm not fascinated by some, I would say, aspect, I mean, possibilities of the mirrors, but definitely by the depth creating by two mirrors face to face. This is the infinities. I remember when I was a teenager, when I started to understand that the universe was infinities, it really depressed me a lot. I thought like this is you know, I know some people who are 80 years old now who tell me the same. So it's not a young thing. It's this idea that infinities is something that really not drive me crazy, but almost can be at some point evoked and spoken and developed with art. Because art has this, I think, this incredible ability of, like Stanley Kubrick is doing, of asking questions rather than mathematics. I don't know if we had this discussion once. As the mathematics can explain everything, the mathematics can, I mean, mathematician says that they can explain everything, which is not wrong. They can explain everything, but not art. I'm not talking about contemporary art. I'm talking about the mystery of creation. I'm talking about this incredible issue that music what we think that has been invented, in the slavery times on the border of the Mississippi, come back, you don't know how, and it's become the national music of Mali. The fact that music melodies, human being has been able to record music, let's say, since the end of the 19th century. But I'm sure that if we would have been able to record music since the Renaissance, I'm quite sure that there were melodies that you can find today again. So this mathematic aspect of art is both something that can be understood in the fact that music is just, as I said before, a wave that exists yet in the universe, that we do not invent actually, is just here. Like a theory of quantum physics, we don't say that Einstein invented, he discovered the theory of, so the theory was here. Today, in quantum physics, talking about quantum physics, there is what we call the ring and the string and the Brown theory, which is a definition of the whole universe in its elementary, infinitely small particle, even smaller than the atom, the lepton, the graviton, which would be, I say would because I'm not an expert, a string of energy, or a ring of energy, or Brown of energy. And this idea that the whole universe is like vibrating of energy, for me, it's totally musical. It has something to do with sounds, with music, not sound. Sound is another thing, with music. So, light, as long as I've been working on this research, is doing interviews with physicians like Anton Zellinger, who was also in Documenta. Everything I could gather about the definition of light is first very much into this vibration as well. Is a wave. Anton Zellinger said that light is a wave. And I said, a wave? He said, no, this is the old-fashioned way of thinking that a wave is not, is this. He said, it's a wave. So light is a wave. And the second thing is that I have to say that I've been speaking now and I'm a bit lost in this interesting issue. So please ask me the question.
No, I think it's fascinating because you're taking such a big grip on things. It's like you mentioned that some of the scientists that you speak about are looking for an equation which is sometimes called the God equation, which is the principle that explains everything, and kind of an idea of a synthesis, or that I kind of sense in your work also, between what they search for in religion, in art, and in science. Is that something you are looking for with the repair? That
I think
it's
super interesting, Magnus. I've been thinking a lot about whether the Reaper is God, rather than the graviton, because the boson of Higgs that have been now shown with the CERN accelerator, you know, in Geneva, is showing the elementary particle of gravity. Okay, we know that. And there was, I don't remember the writer, it was American, who wrote a book comparing this, before they were able to show it. Les gerbes, I mean, the traces of this elementary particle as the proof of God. Now, this is not the proof of God. The proof of the idea that scientists such as Einstein or Higgs were involved in extremely complex researches could lead to God. It is in the fact that Einstein was working on the hugeness, the huge infinities, with this general relativity theory, and Higgs and others on the smallest infinities. And actually the whole theory would be an equation that could summarize the smallest infinities and the biggest at the same time. And most of the scientists say that they are all looking for that. The string theory is one of it, but it's at some point they are all looking for God, because it would explain many things. I think the Reaper is much more interesting. I talked with Anton about this issue of the Reaper, and he was extremely interested by this as a scientist.
When you tell me this, looking into the microcosmos and out to the macrocosmos, that's almost a description of one of the coupled objects in your vitrine there also, which is a microscope, and then the telescope shooting out of it. How are we with time? Do we need to let the audience into some questions? Yeah. Oops, sorry. So we have a microphone, and if you have a question, it's nice if you speak into the microphone, because then we're recording this for our archive. So anybody?
Any first question?
Let me ask one. Thank you very much. It's very nice to see you, and very nice to hear you speak in person. This light and this extinction, that it just disappears. I mean, are you looking into something like Buddhism, because this end thing for Buddhism, for a Buddhist, is actually to really just go into nothing. Does that appeal to you?
I would say at some point yes, because I've been very much influenced by not Buddhism, a bit more by Taoism, by Lao Tzu. I think that when I was talking about the emptiness, there's this beautiful sentence of Lao Tzu which says, "Man create things, but the emptiness, the void, gives them the meaning." This kind of impossible, I mean, or I would say this kind of obviousness that everything has something to do with is paradox. The void, the emptiness, the space, the time. What is extremely interesting with the Reaper is that the Reaper binds two things which have two space-time which has nothing to do together. I like to say that Marcel Duchamp did a Reaper with the ready-made. In the beginning of the 20th century, he wrote a letter to his brother in which he was explaining him, "I'm about to do an important discovery." He mentioned in 1907, he suggested the ready-made. The ready-made, as far as I'm concerned, as an artist, is a repair. Marcel Duchamp, at this moment, repair. He reorient in something in which we still are today in contemporary art. I think what I found extremely interesting in this going back and forth between rationalism and it's very difficult to talk about Buddhism or Taoism or Sufism, using the word spiritualism, because I think they are much more philosophy. And even Buddhism, I think, the few I know, is a philosophy in which I definitely, follow. I don't know if I answered your question, but as far as I'm concerned, the most important idea is this idea of linking of, also another philosopher interesting, Gilles Deleuze and Guattari, when they developed the idea of the fold. I think the fold is a repair. It's a repair between two different pieces.
I'd like maybe to ask you, you talked about repair as cultural anthropology, as reappropriation, as a way to connect things and places and histories, and then you choose to mirror in the way of constructing your own installation the modes of display of the ethnographic museum, which has this very particular connection to a certain idea, as you said, of order of knowledge and power. Why is that, and can you talk a bit more about that?
About the use of mirror, you mean?
Yeah, no, about why do you choose to, as a form of presenting your research and material and work, to mirror this kind of ethnographic museum display, and is that an ongoing interest, or do you consider in the future that you will potentially translate your thinking and projects into other modes of display?
But just
because you did that in Kunstwerk.
By the reusing items which come from museum, you mean? Or?
No, I mean the form of display, the fact that you choose to build this cabinet with these certain characteristics, and in Berlin where you had the stuffed animals. So when we experience your exhibition, you have moments.
You know, the thing is that few people, maybe people know now, but I've been at some point, as I showed you the fabric repaired, I've been interested and also at trying to collect items since 1995 from the non-Western culture. I've been working as an artist during 10 years, but never really getting close to this passion that I still have. The thing is that I have to say that exactly like in this installation, you have two of my, I would say, angle of work, of reflection. Something that is indeed a reenactment of storages, of at least references, that's something that exists, and book that has already existed, and a creation, even if it's not a creation, if you're going to kill me after I told you that we do not create, we repair. So I put two mirrors and I put a stick and I repaired. Okay. What is important, what I think extremely important not in contemporary art, but in art in general, and that I have learned by getting very close to traditional non-Western artifact, is the fact that when you are in front of Brancusi or Picasso painting, and when you are in front of a Pendé mask that has, the Pendé Hill mask have influenced Picasso in his Demoiselles d'Avignon. It's easy. You put the Pendé mask, you have the Picasso painting, and the Pendé do not disappear. The Pendé is still here, and sometimes is killing the painting. Why? Because the Pendé mask used to have a reality. That's the difference between traditional items and contemporary art. And as far as I'm concerned, this is my own opinion. I also like artists who use totally brand new material. I also like work which are totally brand new. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm fascinated by the fact that at some point, some object, books, masks, fetishes, fun materials, like this corrugated rooftop, used to have a reality. They are not like, I would say, in French we say gratuit, to say that, free. So talking about the vitrine, the item of the vitrine, I can, on one hand, create one, or on the other hand, use one that has been used, like the one I did in Documenta. But it's two different statements.
Hi. You just said that you're collecting objects produced after 95.
Sorry?
You are collecting right now objects produced after 95. Do you classify them? Do you have like a display, a personal display?
No, I mean, I don't classify them because also, to continue with this answer I gave, I much follow and I'm much more sensitive to the reality of the object. Of course, I've been fascinated by repaired object and by the repair actually. But there's something that really fascinates me is here again what at some point the Western rationale again, René Descartes is going to kill me tonight, the ghost of Descartes, has totally missed is the magical side of the item. The reality that these items used to have, it's at some point, it's something that is an immateriality of the object. What Western modern museums have gathered the last 500 years, they are just illusion. When I told you before that Papua New Guinea, a traditional Sepik civilization, most of them, I'm not an expert of Papua New Guinea, but from what I've read, most of the masks are, after the ritual, brought into the forest and burned or destroyed. It means that the most important object is immaterial. So when I would say that if I collect, it's just because I'm trying also to both understand and maybe reuse this item. But the idea of the collection, for me, is a nonsense, especially if you start to think of that the immateriality of the item is the reality of this object.
They carry a kind of collective memory.
They carry a kind of, absolutely. Yeah. A collective memory expressed through a self-memory, yeah. The artist.
Thank you. Can I just question you a bit more about that? Because doesn't the artwork, the Picasso, as opposed to the painted mask, have its own reality and fulfills a function and expresses the nature of the artist, in a sense? So what's the difference?
It's a very interesting question-answer, I would say. I think the difference is that at some point these items, I mean traditional items, which are today in most, for them, I mean 95% of them, stored in Western museums, are not reachable by their, I mean, the population who are the descendants of these cultures. So you're right when you said that Picasso has a reality, but it's totally available for the Western mind. The problem here is not only sensitive, but it's political as well. So I agree, and I add at some point this fundamental political issue because the 21st century will be the stake of restitution of many of these items. And it started actually. Just to finish with, especially with items which include human left, bones and ancestors.
Any other question? Can I ask you another question? The Pompidou has recently rehung their permanent collection and the title of Plural Modernities, and a lot of museums and galleries are considering the way in which they are addressing expanded geographies and different narratives. What's your view on that? How do you think that the contemporary museum and gallery should be dealing with the need to tell more plural stories, and how?
In any case, I would say that it's good, but it's come a little bit late. Deleuze was already talking about universalities there is an incredible text in which he said there's no one universality, there are universalities. And I have to say something. Also to continue the conversation with this interesting person in the back of the space, I don't understand that if I want to see a Songhai mask, I have to go in an ethnologist museum. But is the West able to hang exhibition of modern art and African masks together? This is another. I know Catherine Grenier who did this. The exhibition has a big success in France, this new accrochage. But as far as I'm concerned, the real debate is why, if I want to see a Songhai mask, I have to go in an ethnologist museum. This is art. With its difference, with its specificity. But why we have to go to an ethnologist museum? This is the real stake. This we'll see.
We talked the other night about an upcoming show with Chris Marker, and I was so glad to hear that he had been important for you at some stage. It was the film...
Les statues meurent aussi.
Yes. Could you mention that?
Les statues meurent aussi is a movie by Alain René and Chris Maker, and actually it starts like this. I don't remember exactly the translation in English, but it's when statues die, they go into history or something like no, into museum, and when humans die, they go into history or something like this. And this is the botany of what we call culture.
And this film was banned in France for a long time.
Yeah, of course, because I think the last sentence is very important. No, sorry. This is the botany of death that we call culture, which is important. And actually, Marker is very interesting, following what I was mentioning before, the magical side, the immateriality of it. Because he says that when the statue die, we put them in museum, and we think that we keep them. But no, there is something else.
Okay, Sophia?
Well, I guess we should applaud and thank Kader Attia and... And maybe just mentioning that over the coming seasons, we'll be developing a series of public programs and screenings related to Kader Attia. So we hope to see you soon again and that you can join the program and follow the information online. Thank you. Thank you, Magnus.